I stared at the confirmation email on my screen, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for my coffee cup. There it was, his RSVP to the Global Innovation Summit, along with a short note that made my stomach clench. Looking forward to sharing my insights on business leadership. We should catch up for old time's sake. Richard. 5 years. It had been 5 years since I'd left Richard Bennett, and here he was, still assuming he could command my attention with a few casual words. My assistant, Grace, noticed my expression and raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, Claire?" I turned my laptop toward her, watching as her eyes widened in recognition. "He has no idea, does he?" "No," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "He doesn't know I'm the founder of Summit Solutions, or that I'm the one who built this conference from the ground up." I leaned back in my chair, memories flooding back unbidden. "Really, Claire? A business degree? Let's be realistic. You're barely managing our household budget. Some people just aren't cut out for the corporate world, darling." His condescending voice still echoed in my head. Even after all these years, I'd believed him then. God help me, I'd believed every word. 10 years of marriage to Richard had systematically dismantled every ounce of confidence I'd ever possessed. He'd been so subtle about it at first. A slight criticism here, a gentle mockery there, always followed by, "I'm just trying to help you improve, darling." He was a successful business consultant after all. Surely he knew best. The day everything changed was burned into my memory. I'd been organizing a charity gala for his firm. Unpaid, of course, because it's good experience for you, darling. The event was a massive success, and one of the senior partners had pulled me aside. "Claire, this is exceptional work. Have you ever considered event management professionally? We'd love to have someone with your skills on our team." Before I could respond, Richard had appeared at my elbow, his arm wrapping around my waist in what looked like an affectionate gesture, but felt like a vice grip. "Oh, Claire's not interested in professional work. She's got her hands full managing our home, don't you, darling?" That night, as I lay awake listening to his steady breathing beside me, something finally clicked. I saw with crystal clarity how he'd been shaping my world, making it smaller and smaller until it fit his precise specifications. The next morning, I enrolled in a business management course without telling him. 6 months later, I left with nothing but a suitcase and a business plan. Grace's voice pulled me back to the present. "So, what are you going to do?" I looked around my office. My beautiful, sun-filled office on the 30th floor of downtown Seattle's most prestigious business district. Summit Solutions had grown from a one-woman show operating out of my studio apartment to one of the most respected event management firms on the West Coast. The Global Innovation Summit was our crown jewel, bringing together business leaders from around the world. "I'm going to do exactly what I've been doing," I replied, straightening the papers on my desk. "I'm going to run the most successful business conference this city has ever seen." I paused, allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. "And I'm going to personally welcome Richard Bennett to the stage." Grace grinned. "He won't know what hit him." "No," I agreed, opening my calendar to review the conference preparations. "But that's not why I'm doing this. This isn't about revenge. It's about finally showing myself what I knew all along, that I was always capable of more than he let me believe." As I immersed myself in the daily operations of running my company, a notification popped up on my screen. Richard had posted on LinkedIn about his upcoming speaking engagement at the summit. "Honored to be sharing my expertise on building successful businesses," he wrote. "Sometimes the best teachers are our own failures." I felt a chill run down my spine as I read those words. Richard always did have a talent for unintentional irony. If only he knew that his greatest failure, the wife he'd dismissed and belittled, was about to teach him the most important lesson of his career. But as I reviewed the conference schedule, a nagging doubt crept in. Richard was notorious for doing extensive research on every event he attended. How had he not discovered my involvement? Something wasn't adding up, and I had a sinking feeling that this apparent oversight might not be as accidental as it seemed. I reached for my phone, then stopped. Was I ready for what might happen when our paths finally crossed again? And more importantly, was I prepared for the possibility that Richard might have changed as much as I had over the past 5 years? The answers to those questions would have to wait. Right now, I had a conference to run, and success, as I'd learned the hard way, was the best revenge. The conference center buzzed with activity as I walked through the main hall, clipboard in hand. 2 weeks until the Global Innovation Summit, and everything had to be perfect. I'd built my reputation on attention to detail, and this event would be no exception. The lighting rig in the main hall needs adjusting, I called out to Mike, our technical director, and make sure the backdrop for the keynote stage is properly secured. I remembered all too well how Richard would have handled this, barking orders, making people feel small. I'd promised myself I'd never manage that way. My phone vibrated with a message from my sister, Nora. Just saw Richard's latest post about the conference. You okay? I clicked on the link she'd sent. There he was, impeccably dressed in his signature navy suit, standing in front of his consulting firm's logo. The caption read, "Preparing something special for the Global Innovation Summit. Time to share some hard truths about success and failure." My stomach tightened. That choice of words. Hard truths. It was pure Richard. The same phrase he'd used countless times during our marriage. "I'm just telling you some hard truths, Claire. Someone has to." I was so lost in thought I almost collided with Grace, who was hurrying toward me with a worried expression. "Claire, we might have a problem," she said, lowering her voice. "I just got off the phone with Richard's assistant. He's requesting a private meeting room for the day before his presentation. Says he needs to prepare properly and meet with some special guests." "That's not unusual for speakers," I replied, but something felt off. Richard had always been methodical, calculating. Every move was part of a larger strategy. "There's more," Grace continued. "He specifically asked about the owner of Summit Solutions. His assistant was very interested in whether they'd be attending the conference." I sat down on a nearby chair, my mind racing. "He knows," I whispered. "Or at least, he suspects." The realization sent me back to the day I'd started Summit Solutions. I'd been working as a waitress, taking business classes online, and living in a tiny studio apartment. My first client was a local boutique owner who needed help with a fashion show. The budget was minimal, but I threw myself into it completely. "You'll never succeed without me." Richard's voice had echoed in my head as I worked late into the night, planning every detail. The fashion show was a hit, and word spread quickly. More clients followed, each event bigger than the last. I'd been careful to keep my name out of the press, operating behind the Summit Solutions brand. It wasn't fear. At least, that's what I told myself. It was strategy. I wanted to be judged on the quality of my work, not as Richard Bennett's ex-wife. "Should we cancel his speaking slot?" Grace asked, bringing me back to the present. "No," I said firmly. That's exactly what he'd expect. Running away, avoiding confrontation. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "But we can be prepared. Get me everything you can about his recent business activities, especially any events he's spoken at in the past year." As Grace hurried off, I walked to the window overlooking the Seattle skyline. The same view Richard used to admire from his office, back when he thought he owned this city. And me. Now my company occupied the building's top floor, while his firm had moved to smaller offices across town after losing several major clients. I pulled up his company's website on my phone. The consulting firm was still successful, but nowhere near its former glory. The pieces started falling into place. Richard needed this conference, needed the exposure, the networking opportunities. And if he knew I was behind it... My phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Claire? It's Jessica Morgan. I used to work for Richard?" My heart skipped a beat. Jessica had been Richard's assistant during our marriage, privy to everything that went on at his firm. We hadn't spoken since I left. "You need to know something," she said, her voice tense. "Richard's been asking questions about Summit Solutions, digging into the company's background, and he's been meeting with Martin Brown." I felt the blood drain from my face. Martin Brown, the venture capitalist who'd tried to hostile take over my company last year. The attempt had failed, but it had cost us several important contracts. "How long?" I managed to ask. "They've had at least 3 meetings in the past month. Claire, I think he's planning something big at the conference. Something to do with the company's ownership structure." After thanking Jessica and ending the call, I sat at my desk, hands shaking slightly. Richard had always been obsessed with winning, with proving he was the smartest person in the room. If he thought he could use this conference to undermine everything I'd built, a knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, quickly composing myself. It was Linda from our legal team, holding a thick folder. "You asked me to review the conference contracts," she said. "I found something interesting in the speaker agreements, something that might give us an advantage." As she began to explain, a plan started forming in my mind. If Richard wanted to play games, he was about to learn that I wasn't the same woman who'd left him 5 years ago. But first, I needed to make a call to someone who knew exactly how Richard Bennett operated when he felt threatened. I picked up my phone again, scrolling to a number I'd kept but never used. It was time to contact Richard's ex-business partner, the one person who'd witnessed his downfall from the inside. The question was, would Thomas Reynolds be willing to help me stay one step ahead of whatever Richard was planning? Thomas Reynolds suggested meeting at a small coffee shop in Pioneer Square, away from the business district's prying eyes. As I walked in, I spotted him immediately, still the same imposing figure I remembered, though his hair had gone completely gray. He stood as I approached, offering a firm handshake. "Claire," he said warmly, "you look well. Success suits you." I settled into the chair across from him, noting how different this felt from our last interaction. At a charity gala 5 years ago, when I was still Richard's wife, still playing the role of the supportive spouse who needed to be seen but not heard. "Thank you for meeting me," I began, but Thomas held up a hand. "Before we get into it, I need to know something. Are you ready for what Richard might do? Because believe me, he's not the same man you left. He's desperate." I thought about the Richard I'd known. Controlled, calculated, always 3 steps ahead. What happened after I left? Thomas leaned back, his expression grim. It started small. He became more aggressive with clients, less willing to listen. Then he made a series of bad investments, convinced he could never be wrong. When I tried to intervene, he accused me of betrayal, of trying to undermine him. "That sounds familiar," I murmured, remembering similar accusations during our marriage. The final straw came when he lost the Hartley account, our biggest client. They specifically cited his inability to collaborate and resistance to new ideas as reasons for leaving. I tried to buy him out, to save the firm's reputation, but Thomas shook his head. He fought me every step of the way. By the time it was over, we'd lost half our clients. I took a sip of my coffee, processing this information. "And now he's meeting with Martin Brown." "Ah," Thomas's eyes narrowed. "That makes sense. Brown's been looking for a way into the event management industry. Your success with Summit Solutions hasn't gone unnoticed. But why would Richard get involved? What's in it for him? Redemption, perhaps. Or revenge. Probably both." Thomas pulled out his phone, showing me a recent article about Richard's consulting firm. Their numbers were down 40% from last year. "He needs a win, Claire. And if he can't have one of his own, he'll try to take mine," I finished. The realization hit me hard. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood something about Richard that had eluded me during our marriage. "You know," I said slowly, "when I left him, I thought I was the broken one. He'd spent years convincing me I was worthless without him, but he was the one who couldn't function without someone to control." Thomas nodded solemnly. "And that's exactly why you need to be careful. I've seen the speaker agreement you sent over, the one with the clause about conduct detrimental to the conference. It's solid, but Richard's got good lawyers." I smiled, thinking about the additional precautions I'd taken. "Actually, that's not the only protection I have. Would you like to hear my plan?" For the next hour, I laid out my strategy. Thomas listened intently, occasionally offering suggestions or pointing out potential weaknesses. By the time we finished, he was shaking his head in admiration. "You've thought of everything," he said. "But there's one thing you should know about Brown. His last 3 attempted takeovers all involved the same tactic. He looks for internal divisions, people he can turn against each other. That won't work at Summit Solutions," I said confidently. Your team isn't the target," Thomas interrupted. "Think about it. What's the one thing Richard knows better than anyone? Your vulnerabilities, your past. He'll try to use that to create doubt about your leadership. A memory surfaced. Richard at a dinner party, skillfully turning my friends against each other with carefully placed comments and subtle implications. I'd watched him destroy relationships that way, all while maintaining his image as the concerned, helpful mentor. There's something else, Thomas added, his voice lower. Richard's been asking about your sister, Nora. Specifically, about her role in your company. My blood ran cold. Nora had joined Summit Solutions 2 years ago, heading our creative department. She was brilliant at her job, but she'd also been there during my marriage to Richard, had seen the worst of what he'd done to me. He wouldn't, I started, but Thomas's expression stopped me. He already has. Nora received an email yesterday from Brown's office. They're offering her a position, contingent on certain changes at Summit Solutions. I sat back, stunned. Nora hadn't mentioned anything. Was she considering it? No, she wouldn't. Would she? My phone buzzed with a message from Grace. Emergency at the office. The conference center called. There's been a problem with the main hall setup. As I stood to leave, Thomas caught my arm. Claire, there's one more thing you should know. The night you left Richard, he wasn't just angry. He was scared. For the first time in his life, someone had seen through him completely. Don't underestimate how much that terrifies him. I nodded, gathering my things. Thank you, Thomas, for everything. Just be careful, he called after me. And Claire, whatever happens at the conference, make sure you're ready for the spotlight. Because one way or another, this is going to be very public. As I hurried back to the office, my mind was racing. I needed to talk to Nora, needed to understand what was happening with the conference center, needed to prepare for whatever Richard was planning. But underneath all that, a strange calm had settled over me. Because for the first time, I saw Richard clearly, not as the powerful man who had controlled my life, but as someone whose power had always been an illusion, built on other people's fear and self-doubt. The question was, what would he do now that the illusion was crumbling? I pulled out my phone to call Nora, but before I could dial, another message came through. This one was from an anonymous number. You should ask your sister about the meeting she had with Richard last week. Some things never change. He still likes his coffee at the corner cafe on 5th. The conference center chaos turned out to be a false alarm, a miscommunication about the stage setup that Grace had already resolved. But as I stood in the empty main hall, my footsteps echoing off the high ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, that anonymous text about Nora burning in my mind. I'd always promised myself I wouldn't become like Richard, suspicious, controlling, seeing betrayal around every corner. But wasn't blind trust just another form of weakness? I found Nora in her office, surrounded by mood boards for the conference. She looked up with a smile that faltered when she saw my expression. We need to talk, I said, closing the door behind me. About your meeting with Richard. The color drained from her face, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she stood, walking to her window that overlooked the city. I was going to tell you. When? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Before or after the conference where he's planning to destroy everything we've built? Nora turned, her eyes flashing. Is that what you think? That I'd help him hurt you? After everything he put you through? Put us through? I remembered the nights Nora had spent at my apartment after I left Richard, helping me piece myself back together. She'd been my rock, my constant supporter. But Richard had a way of twisting things, of making the impossible seem reasonable. Then why meet with him? Why keep it secret? Nora sank back into her chair. Because I wanted to understand what he was planning. Because... She hesitated. Because I needed to see for myself if he'd changed. And? He's worse, she said quietly. More desperate. He talked about Brown's offer, tried to convince me it was in everyone's best interest, that you were out of your depth with the company's growth. She pulled out her phone, showing me a recording. I documented everything. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by shame. Nora, I'm so sorry. I should have... She cut me off with a fierce hug. Don't you dare apologize. Richard's great talent was always making us doubt ourselves and each other. I needed him to believe I was considering his offer. As we broke apart, I noticed a file on her desk marked Chen Industries, Acquisition Strategy. Nora followed my gaze. Their complete playbook, she said with a grim smile. Richard was very thorough in explaining their plans. Apparently, they're planning to use the conference to announce a merger, presenting it as a fait accompli to pressure shareholders. I sat down heavily. Can they do that? They can try. But Richard made a mistake. Nora's eyes gleamed. He was so busy trying to manipulate me, he forgot that I'm not the same person either. I've learned a few things about corporate strategy myself. She opened her laptop, showing me a series of documents. Chen's company is overextended. They've leveraged themselves heavily for this acquisition push. If their announcement fails, if they're publicly embarrassed, their stock would tank, I finished, understanding dawning. And Richard? Would be finished in the consulting world. No one trusts a failed hostile takeover artist. Nora paused. But Claire, there's something else you need to know. Something about why Richard's really doing this. She pulled out an old photograph from my wedding day. I was beaming at the camera, young and in love, while Richard stood beside me, his hand possessively on my shoulder. Look at the background, Nora said softly. I squinted at the image. Behind us, partially obscured, stood a woman I vaguely remembered, one of Richard's clients. She was speaking to Thomas Reynolds, both of them looking concerned. That's Catherine Hartley, Nora explained. Her company was Richard's biggest client, the one he lost. She's attending the conference. I don't understand. Catherine's company didn't just leave Richard's firm. They signed with a new consulting agency, one that specializes in workplace culture and inclusive leadership. Nora met my eyes. They signed with them specifically because of their female leadership and commitment to ethical business practices. The implications hit me like a wave. He's not just after my company. He's trying to prove that his way was right all along, Nora finished. If he can take down a successful woman-led company, if he can show that his aggressive, controlling approach is still the only way to win, he validates everything he ever did to me, I whispered. The silence that followed was broken by Grace bursting into the office. Claire, you need to see this. Richard's just posted a preview of his conference speech. He's talking about you. I grabbed Nora's laptop, pulling up Richard's social media. There he was, impeccably dressed as always, speaking directly to the camera. At the Global Innovation Summit, I'll be sharing a deeply personal story about success, failure, and redemption. Sometimes our greatest setbacks come from trusting the wrong people, people who abandon their commitments, who lack the strength to face challenges. But true leaders turn those betrayals into opportunities. My hands clenched into fists as his words washed over me. It was classic Richard, positioning himself as the victim while subtly undermining others. But this time, something was different. This time, I saw through every word, every calculated gesture. He's scared, I realized aloud. This isn't just about business. He's terrified that if I succeed, it proves everything he ever told me was a lie. Nora touched my arm gently. So, what are we going to do about it? I looked between my sister and Grace, feeling a surge of gratitude for their loyalty, their strength. Richard had spent years trying to isolate me, to make me believe I was alone. He never understood that real leadership isn't about control. It's about trust. We're going to give him exactly what he wants, I said, a plan forming in my mind, a chance to tell his story. But first, I pulled out my phone, scrolling to Catherine Hartley's contact information. I think it's time for a different kind of leadership lesson. Catherine Hartley chose to meet at her office, a corner suite in one of Seattle's most innovative sustainable buildings. The walls were glass, the furniture reclaimed wood, and the energy entirely solar-powered. Everything about it spoke of forward thinking, of breaking from tradition. It couldn't have been more different from Richard's preference for old-world mahogany and leather. I've been following your work with Summit Solutions, Catherine said, gesturing for me to take a seat. Though I didn't realize until recently that you were behind it. You've been discreet. I wanted the company to succeed on its own merits, I replied, noting how Catherine's expression softened with understanding. Not hiding, just choosing your moments? She smiled knowingly. I understand that better than most. Richard never did grasp why I moved our contracts to a new consulting firm. He assumed it was about fees or market trends. Everything except the actual reason. Which was? Catherine leaned forward. The day I decided to end our relationship with Richard's firm, I overheard him berating a junior associate, a young woman who'd proposed an innovative environmental initiative. His exact words were, "Leave the real business decisions to people who understand them." She paused. It reminded me of something I'd witnessed years ago at a certain wedding. My heart skipped a beat as I remembered the photograph Nora had shown me. You saw? I saw a pattern, Catherine said firmly, one that had no place in modern business. When I learned about Summit Solutions' approach to leadership, the emphasis on collaboration, on lifting others up rather than tearing them down, I knew I'd made the right choice. I took a deep breath. Richard's planning something at the conference. He's working with Martin Brown. To attempt a hostile takeover, yes. Catherine's smile turned sharp. Chen's been trying to get a meeting with me for months. He seems to think that if he acquires Summit Solutions, he'll somehow inherit our contracts too. Would he? Claire. Catherine leaned back, her expression serious. When I moved our business from Richard's firm, it wasn't just about finding new consultants. It was about investing in a different future. One where success isn't measured by how many people you can dominate, but by how many you can elevate. She stood, walking to a wall of awards and photographs. Do you see this? She pointed to a picture of a group of women in business attire, smiling proudly. These are the participants from our first Women in Leadership program. The initiative that Richard dismissed? It's now our most successful corporate development project. Turning back to me, she added, which is why I've been waiting for you to contact me. I have a proposition that might interest you. For the next hour, Catherine laid out a plan that made my head spin with its potential. By the time I left her office, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. But I also knew that the hardest part was still to come. Back at Summit Solutions, I found Grace and Nora waiting in my office with news of their own. We've been going through the conference registrations, Grace said, pulling up a spreadsheet. Remember how Richard requested that private meeting room for special guests? We cross-referenced the names. They're all investors, specifically investors who've recently been approached by Brown Industries. Nora picked up the thread. But here's the interesting part. We also found a pattern of recent stock purchases in Summit Solutions. Small amounts, spread across different shell companies. They've been trying to quietly build a position. How much have they accumulated? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Just under the threshold that would require public disclosure, Grace confirmed. They're planning to reveal it during Richard's speech. Make it look like they already have significant shareholder support. I smiled, thinking of my conversation with Catherine. What if we could turn that strategy against them? I outlined what I'd learned, watching their eyes widen as the implications became clear. It's risky, Nora cautioned. If it backfires, everything worth doing is risky, I replied, remembering all the times Richard had used that fear of risk to keep me in check. But this time, we're not just risking failure. We're betting on success. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Looking forward to catching up before my speech. For old time's sake, I showed the message to Nora and Grace. He's getting confident. Good. Are you going to meet him? Grace asked. Yes, I said, turning to look out at the Seattle skyline. My skyline now. But not alone. I picked up my phone to make a call, but Nora stopped me. Before you do this, are you sure you're ready? Not just for the business part, but for facing him again? It was a fair question. The last time I'd seen Richard face to face, I'd been leaving our house with a suitcase and shattered confidence. Now, standing in my own office, surrounded by the company I'd built and the people I trusted, I felt something I'd never experienced during my marriage. Genuine power. You know what I realized? I said slowly. Richard spent years telling me I wasn't ready. For success, for independence, for anything that might threaten his control. He made me believe that being ready meant being perfect, being absolutely certain. I turned to face my sister and my closest colleague. But that's not what ready means. Being ready means being willing to take risks, to face challenges, to learn from mistakes. By that measure, I've been ready for years. Nora smiled proudly. So what's our next move? I pulled up the conference schedule on my tablet. Richard wants to tell a story about betrayal and redemption? Fine. Let's give him an audience he'll never forget. As I began outlining the details of my plan, a notification popped up on my screen. Another social media post from Richard, this one featuring an old photo of us from our marriage. The caption read, "Success is about recognizing when to hold on and when to let go. Sometimes those who leave us do us the greatest favor." I stared at his smiling face, remembering how that smile used to terrify me, how it meant he was about to deliver another hard truth that would chip away at my self-worth. Now, looking at the same expression, I felt only clarity. "Grace," I said, "contact Thomas Reynolds. Tell him we're moving forward with everything we discussed. And Nora, it's time to activate that contingency plan we prepared." "The nuclear option?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "No," I replied, closing the social media app. "The truth option. Richard wants to tell his story? Let's make sure everyone hears the whole thing." The corner cafe on 5th hadn't changed in 5 years. Same industrial chic decor, same oversized windows, same table in the back where Richard always held court. As I walked in, I spotted him immediately, reading something on his tablet, his usual Americano growing cold beside him. I'd chosen to arrive exactly 7 minutes late. Not enough to be rude, but enough to show I wasn't operating on his schedule anymore. His head snapped up as I approached, and for a split second, I caught a flash of something in his eyes. Uncertainty? Fear? It vanished behind his practiced smile. "Claire," he stood, gesturing to the chair across from him, "you look successful." "Amazing what 5 years of freedom can do," I replied, remaining standing. "This won't take long, Richard. I have a conference to run." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ah, yes, your little event planning business. Quite a step up from organizing my firm's charity galas, isn't it?" I thought of Catherine Hartley's words about investing in a different future, of Nora's recorded conversations, of Thomas Reynolds's warnings. Richard was playing his usual game, trying to diminish, to control the narrative. But this time, I knew exactly what was behind his confident facade. "Why did you really want to meet Richard?" I asked, finally taking my seat. "To remind me of my place? Or to make sure I still remembered how to be small?" He leaned back, studying me with those calculating eyes I used to find so impressive. "I'm concerned about you, Claire. This business of yours, it's grown beyond your experience. The responsibilities, the pressures. I'd hate to see you crushed under the weight of it all. Like Catherine Hartley crushed your firm's profits when she left?" The shot landed. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "You've been talking to Catherine? And Thomas? And others?" I pulled out my phone, setting it on the table. It's amazing how many people are willing to share stories once someone starts listening. "Is that what this is about?" His voice took on that patronizing tone I remembered so well. "Collecting stories to make me look bad? Claire, we both know you're better than petty revenge." "You're right," I agreed, watching confusion flicker across his face. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. Something you never quite understood the difference between." I opened my bag, pulling out a folder. "Your speaking slot at the conference has been moved to the main stage. Full audience, live stream to all our virtual attendees. You'll have everyone's complete attention." "How generous of you," he said dryly, but I caught the calculating look in his eyes. This was what he wanted, a bigger platform for whatever he and Brown had planned. "I'm not finished," I continued. "You'll also have some special guests in the audience, the board members from Brown Industries, Catherine Hartley and her executive team, and—" I paused for effect. "The journalists who've been investigating patterns of workplace harassment and financial manipulation in the consulting industry." The color drained from his face. "You wouldn't dare." "The old Claire wouldn't," I agreed. She was too afraid, too convinced of her own worthlessness. But you see, Richard, that's the funny thing about spending years telling someone they're nothing without you. Eventually, they have to decide whether to believe you or prove you wrong. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a threatening whisper. If you think you can threaten me? Threaten you? I laughed, and the genuine amusement in it seemed to startle him. Richard, I'm giving you exactly what you wanted, a chance to tell your story, to show everyone exactly who you are. Standing, I gathered my things. Your choice now is simple. You can withdraw from the conference, quietly end your arrangement with Brown, and we can all move on with our lives. Or you can take that stage tomorrow and try to tear down everything I've built. But understand this, if you do, you won't be the only one telling a story. Every person you've belittled, every deal you've manipulated, every life you've tried to make smaller to make yourself feel bigger, all of those stories will come out. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. You really think you've won, don't you? That you've outmaneuvered the master? His laugh was ugly. You forget, Claire. I taught you everything you know about business. I looked back at him, feeling a strange mix of pity and triumph. No, Richard. You taught me everything you know about business. I learned the rest on my own. As I walked out of the cafe, my phone buzzed with messages. Nora confirming that our key investors were on board. Grace reporting that the conference center security had been fully briefed. Thomas Reynolds sending final documentation about Richard's business practices. But it was Catherine Hartley's message that made me smile. Board approval confirmed. Ready when you are. I headed back to the office, my mind already on tomorrow's events. Richard had always loved an audience, had always believed that his version of the truth was the only one that mattered. Tomorrow, he'd have his chance to speak. And so would I. But as I reached my car, a final message came through. From Martin Brown himself. We should talk. Privately. Some stories are better left untold. I stared at the message, remembering all the times Richard had used similar words to keep me quiet, to maintain his control. Brown was offering a way out. A private resolution that would protect everyone's reputation. The old Claire would have taken it, would have chosen safety over truth. But I wasn't that Claire anymore. I typed a simple response. See you at the conference, Mr. Brown. I look forward to hearing your side of the story. Then I called Nora. Is everything ready for tomorrow's announcement? All set, she confirmed. But Claire, are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. I thought about the years I'd spent going back. Back to Richard's manipulation. Back to doubting myself. Back to believing I needed someone else's permission to succeed. I'm sure, I said firmly. It's time to move forward. The morning of the conference dawned clear and bright, Seattle's skyline crisp against the blue sky. I'd arrived at the venue before sunrise, needing to feel the quiet of the empty halls before chaos descended. Standing on the main stage, I looked out at the rows of empty seats that would soon be filled with hundreds of business leaders, investors, and journalists. My phone buzzed. A message from Nora. Chen's people are already here. They're trying to schedule last-minute meetings with some of our key shareholders. I smiled, remembering Richard's old tactics. Create urgency, divide attention, force rushed decisions. Some things never changed. Let them, I typed back. Just make sure everyone sticks to the script. Grace met me in the green room, tablet in hand. Security caught someone trying to access the main control room earlier. One of Brown's IT specialists, claiming he was here to check the audiovisual setup. They're getting desperate, I noted, reviewing the morning's schedule. Any word from Richard? His assistant confirmed he's on his way. But Claire, Grace hesitated. We just got word that Jessica Morgan was fired from Richard's firm last night. My head snapped up. Jessica, Richard's former assistant who had warned me about his plans. Is she okay? She's fine. Actually, she's here. Says she has something you need to see before Richard takes the stage. I found Jessica in a quiet corner of the lobby, clutching a leather portfolio. The confident executive assistant I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked both worried and determined. I should have brought this to you sooner, she said, opening the portfolio. But I kept hoping. She shook her head. Richard's been planning this for longer than you know. Look, inside were documents dating back 3 years. Emails, meeting notes, financial records. A systematic plan to undermine Summit Solutions, starting almost from the day I'd launched the company. Richard had been watching, waiting, gathering allies like Brown. He couldn't stand it, Jessica explained. Watching you succeed, watching others praise your work. Every time Summit Solutions won a major contract, he'd become obsessed with finding ways to prove it was luck or connections or anything but your actual ability. I scanned the documents, feeling a strange sense of peace. He wasted 3 years plotting revenge instead of building something new. There's more, Jessica added quietly. He's prepared a video presentation for his speech, interviews with former clients, edited to make Summit Solutions look unstable. He's planning to announce Brown's takeover bid as a rescue mission. I checked my watch. 2 hours until Richard's keynote. Thank you, Jessica, for everything. She smiled. I watched him destroy too many people's confidence over the years. It's time someone stood up to him. Back in my office, I found Nora and Grace waiting with Catherine Hartley and Thomas Reynolds. Chen's representatives are getting aggressive, Catherine reported. They're telling investors they have evidence of financial mismanagement at Summit Solutions, threatening to make it public if people don't support the takeover. Let them, I said, surprising everyone. In fact, let's make it easier for them. I turned to Nora. Move Richard's speech up. Give him the opening slot. But that ruins our timing, she protested. The shareholders' meeting will have even more impact after his accusations, I finished. Richard wants to tell a story about failure and redemption? Let's give him the chance to really commit to his version of events. Understanding dawned on their faces. Thomas was the first to smile. Make him overplay his hand. Exactly. I pulled up the conference schedule on the main screen. He'll be so focused on destroying my reputation that he won't see what's really happening until it's too late. A commotion outside drew our attention. Through the office windows, I could see Richard arriving, surrounded by his usual entourage. Brown was with him, along with several serious-looking men in suits. Lawyers, probably. Claire, Nora said softly. Once this starts, I know. I watched Richard glad-handing his way through the growing crowd of attendees. He was in his element, commanding attention, playing the role of the distinguished business leader. But you know what I realized? He never actually taught me about business. He taught me about power, how to wield it, how to fear it, how to let it consume you. I turned to face my team, my real partners. But true power isn't about control. It's about creation. About building something so strong that it can withstand any attack because its foundation isn't fear. It's trust. Grace's phone chimed. He's asking to see you. Says it's one last chance to be reasonable. I straightened my jacket, checking my reflection in the window. Tell him I'll see him on stage. I looked at Catherine. Everything ready on your end? She nodded. Board's on standby. Contracts are signed. Just waiting for your signal. Good. I picked up my presentation notes, then paused. You know, for years I thought the opposite of fear was courage. But it's not. The opposite of fear is truth. Richard's about to learn the difference. As I headed for the door, Nora caught my arm. Claire, wait. There's something else you should know. We found out why Richard's been so confident about winning shareholder support. She handed me a tablet. Look who's been quietly buying shares through offshore accounts. I scanned the document, my eyes widening. Well, I said finally, this changes everything. I looked at my team. New plan. For the next 10 minutes, I outlined what we needed to do. When I finished, even Thomas looked impressed. Richard always said business was war, he remarked. But he forgot the most important rule of warfare. What's that? Grace asked. I smiled, heading for the door. Sometimes the best victory is the one your opponent never sees coming. The conference hall was filling up as I walked toward the stage entrance. Through the curtain, I could see Richard reviewing his notes, Brown whispering something in his ear. They looked confident, assured of their victory. Just then, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. You're making a mistake, Claire. Some bridges are better left unburned. I deleted the message without responding. Richard had spent years building his power on other people's fear of burning bridges. He never understood that sometimes, burning the bridge behind you is the only way to ensure you keep moving forward. The stage manager signaled 5 minutes until start. It was time to tell my story. The conference hall hummed with anticipation as Richard took the stage. He looked exactly as I remembered from countless business presentations, confident, commanding, completely in control. The giant screens behind him displayed his company's logo alongside Brown Industries, a visual preview of the partnership he planned to announce. From my position in the wings, I could see everything. Catherine Hartley seated in the front row, Thomas Reynolds a few seats down, Nora coordinating with our team via tablet, and Martin Brown smirking in the VIP section. The room was packed with investors, journalists, and industry leaders. Exactly the audience Richard had always craved. Success, Richard began, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone, is often misunderstood. People think it's about innovation, about disruption. But true success? It's about wisdom, about knowing when to guide others away from their mistakes. My hands tightened on the podium I was standing behind. Classic Richard, positioning himself as the wise protector, the voice of reason. I've watched this industry change, he continued, clicking to a slide showing Summit Solutions' logo. Watched new players enter with grand ideas but limited experience. Watched them stumble, refusing guidance from those who know better. The screens shifted to show carefully selected news clips, minor setbacks my company had faced, edited to look more serious than they were. I saw several investors lean forward, concerned. Today, Richard's voice grew more dramatic. I'm here to tell a story about responsibility, about stepping in when we see potential being squandered, about saving people from their own limitations. He clicked to the next slide, revealing graphs that seemed to show Summit Solutions struggling financially. I caught Nora's eye across the room. She gave me a subtle nod. Everything was proceeding exactly as we'd predicted. Which is why I'm pleased to announce that Brown Industries, in partnership with my firm, is offering to acquire Summit Solutions in a deal that will protect investors, stabilize the company, and ensure proper leadership moving forward. The room erupted in murmurs. I saw several shareholders checking their phones, no doubt seeing the cascade of pre-prepared press releases Brown's team had just launched. I take no pleasure in this, Richard continued, his voice dripping with false concern. Sometimes those closest to us need to be shown their limitations before they can truly grow. Is that what you showed Catherine Hartley, Richard? My voice cut through the hall like a blade. I stepped out onto the stage, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw genuine fear flash across Richard's face. Claire, he recovered quickly, smoothing his tie. I was just getting to the part about your contributions. Were you? I moved to the center stage, picking up a remote of my own. Before or after you explained how you've been secretly buying shares through offshore accounts? Before or after you revealed your 3-year campaign to undermine my company? The screens behind him suddenly shifted, showing the documents Jessica had provided. Richard's careful plans, laid bare for everyone to see. This can be explained, he started, but I wasn't finished. Or maybe you were going to explain your real financial situation? Another click, and the screens showed his firm's true numbers. The client losses, the mounting debts. Is that why you needed this takeover so badly, Richard? Because without it, everyone would finally see who's really failing? Chen stood up, signaling to his lawyers. This is inappropriate. We have a legitimate business proposal. You have a desperate plan, I corrected him. But you chose the wrong partner. And the wrong target. I turned to address the audience directly. Summit Solutions isn't struggling. In fact, I nodded to Nora, who pressed a button on her tablet. The screens changed again, showing our true financial reports. Growth that exceeded industry standards, innovative projects that had transformed the sector, and testimonials from satisfied clients. But the most interesting development, I continued, watching Richard's composure crack, happened about an hour ago. Catherine Hartley stood up. My company, along with a consortium of ethical investment partners, has just acquired a controlling interest in Brown Industries. The room exploded with gasps and exclamations. Brown's face went pale as Catherine continued. We've been watching both Richard's firm and Brown Industries with concern. Their pattern of hostile takeover attempts, their treatment of employees, their outdated leadership models, all of it ends today. Richard stumbled forward. You can't. This isn't possible? I finished for him. That's funny. You used to say the same thing about my chances of success without you. I clicked once more, and the screens showed a final set of documents, the transformation plan for both companies, emphasizing ethical leadership, employee development, and sustainable growth. You see, Richard, you taught me something valuable during our marriage. You taught me what kind of leader I didn't want to be. Someone who builds power by making others feel powerless. Someone so afraid of being surpassed that they try to clip everyone else's wings. The room was utterly silent now, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. But here's what you never understood, I continued, my voice strong and clear. True leadership isn't about limitation. It's about liberation. It's not about controlling the story. It's about empowering others to tell their own. I turned to the audience. Summit Solutions isn't for sale, but we are announcing a new partnership with Catherine Hartley's consortium. Together, we're launching the largest women's leadership development program in the industry's history. And our first case study? I gestured to the screens, which now showed the complete history of Richard's attempts to undermine me, alongside the story of Summit Solutions' rise. Will be about recognizing and overcoming toxic leadership, about building success through collaboration instead of control, about understanding that the best revenge against those who try to limit you isn't to destroy them. It's to succeed so completely that they become irrelevant. Richard lunged for the microphone, but Thomas Reynolds was faster, stepping between us. I think, Thomas said quietly, it's time for you to leave the stage, Richard. As security approached to escort Richard and Brown out, I addressed the audience one final time. Success isn't about power over others. It's about empowering ourselves. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply stand up and tell the truth. The applause that followed wasn't just approval, it was recognition. In every face in that audience, I saw someone who had their own Richard story. Someone who had been told they weren't enough, couldn't succeed, should know their place. As I left the stage, Nora hugged me fiercely. That, she whispered, was better than any revenge. I watched Richard being led out, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He caught my eye one last time, and in that moment, I felt nothing but peace. He had taught me about limitations, about fear, about control, but I had taught myself about freedom. The rest of the conference passed in a blur of congratulations, press interviews, and excited discussions about the future. By evening, when the last attendees were filing out, I finally had a moment to breathe in my office, watching the sunset paint Seattle's skyline in shades of gold. Your phone hasn't stopped buzzing, Nora said, bringing me a much-needed cup of tea. Every major business publication wants an interview. You're trending on LinkedIn. And Catherine says the initial response to the leadership program has been overwhelming. I smiled, thinking of all the women who had approached me after the presentation, sharing their own stories of being underestimated, controlled, or dismissed. It was never about the headlines, or even about proving Richard wrong. I know. Nora settled into the chair across from me. It was about proving yourself right. Grace burst in, waving her tablet excitedly. You need to see this. Richard's firm just released a statement. I took the tablet, reading aloud. In light of recent events, Richard Bennett has stepped down from his position as CEO. The firm will be undergoing restructuring with a focus on ethical leadership and inclusive business practices. Well, that's corporate speak for, we're throwing him under the bus. There's more, Grace scrolled down. 3 other companies have come forward with similar stories about attempted hostile takeovers by Brown Industries. The SEC is investigating their trading practices. I set the tablet aside, feeling no satisfaction in their downfall. Forward those stories to Catherine's team. They'll want to include them in the case study. Just then, Jessica Morgan appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but you have a visitor. Someone from the conference. She says it's important. A young woman entered, looking nervous but determined. Ms. Walker, I'm Amy Brown, Martin Brown's daughter. The room fell silent. I gestured for her to sit down. I wanted you to know, she continued, that what you did today, It wasn't just about stopping a takeover. My father's company, the way they do business. I've been trying to change things from the inside, but nobody would listen. And now? She smiled tentatively. The board has asked me to lead the company's transformation team, working with Catherine Hartley's consortium. They think a fresh perspective might be exactly what we need. After Amy left, Nora turned to me. You knew this would happen, didn't you? Not just stopping Richard, but creating a ripple effect. I hoped, I admitted. When you've lived with someone who makes their success by diminishing others, you start to recognize the pattern, and you realize that breaking free isn't enough. You have to create a new pattern. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Richard. You've changed. I stared at those two words, remembering all the times he'd used change as a criticism, a way to suggest I was becoming something wrong, something that needed to be corrected. Yes, I typed back. I have, and I'm not finished. Standing, I walked to the window. Below, the city was coming alive with evening lights, each one representing someone with their own dreams, their own battles, their own potential waiting to be unleashed. So, what's next? Grace asked, already pulling up our project calendar. First? Sleep, I laughed. Then tomorrow, we start building something new. The leadership program with Catherine, the case studies, the mentorship network. It's not just about business success. It's about changing the conversation. Nora hugged me from behind. You know what I remember most from when you left Richard? You said you didn't know who you were without him. And now I know exactly who I am, I finished. Someone who builds rather than breaks. Someone who lifts others instead of limiting them. I turned to face my team, my family really. Someone who finally understands that the best response to being underestimated is to help others realize their own worth. Later that night, as I packed up to leave, I found an old photo that had fallen from Jessica's portfolio. Richard and me at a business dinner years ago. I was seated slightly behind him, smile fixed, trying to take up as little space as possible. The perfect corporate wife. I slipped the photo into my drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as a marker of distance traveled. The woman in that photo had believed in limitations, in careful compliance, in making herself small to make someone else feel big. The woman I am now believes in possibility. My phone lit up with another message, this time from Catherine. Ready to start changing the world tomorrow? I smiled, typing back. Not the whole world, just the parts we can reach. As I headed out, I paused in the empty conference hall. The stage where everything had changed was now quiet, but I could still feel the energy of the day, the moment when truth had finally spoken louder than fear. Richard had always said that business was about power. He was right about that, but wrong about what power really means. Real power isn't in making others fear you, or in controlling their stories. It's in helping them find their voice, their strength, their moment to shine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that success doesn't have to come at the cost of someone else's dreams. But tonight, standing in the quiet of my achievement, I felt nothing but gratitude for the journey, for the lessons, and most of all, for finally understanding that the voice telling me I wasn't enough had always been wrong. I am enough. I always was. And now, I get to help others realize they are too. That's not just success. That's legacy.